The following is a production of New Mexico State University.
Sometimes people ask me why I paint what they call the strange things that I do paint. And the reason that I do paint the, quote, strange things, unquote, is because sometimes when I write my articles for the various newspapers and magazines, a lot of people wondering, what do you see in your own mind that we are not seeing on the printed page? We tend to be people of imagery. And so by making color images or black and white images pertinent to the time, people can interpret the written word a little bit more clearly. In this particular case, I am looking at an old memory that I have of my father who was butchering an animal, a sheep in this particular case. Now people sometimes say, well, notice that your father is a little lighter skin toned than the people in the foreground. And I said, this is to remind myself that sometimes poor people didn't have the animals that the hacendados had. My father has a big farm and therefore he had animals, but some of the poorer neighbors did not have them, and so they would come and take away the innards, you know? And it was things like hearts, liver, kidney, or the milk guts. And in this case, look at the little girl carrying away the head of the animal. What we are finding out now, as I say so often in my articles, is that sometimes it was the peasant class, those who had no food of their own, no animals of their own, that really got the better of the deal because they had the tastiest part of the whole animal. Frankly, the sweetest part of the sheep is from the jowl meat. And if you've ever had something called buruñates, this is the milk gut, which is stripped and cleaned and then coiled around a whole set of fat tallow that is wrapped around the stomach of the animal. All of these reflect the culture, and I want people to see this reflected in this particular picture. You have another picture over here. This is taken from my mother's hometown, which is Des Montes, New Mexico. And here you see the people shucking the corn and somebody else throwing it into the beehive oven. The beehive oven is called an horno, and the dried corn will then be called chicos, or in southern New Mexico called chacales. Let's look at this particular painting now. Here, this shows the rites of spring cleaning. You see the three elderly ladies over here with a canoa. A canoa, or a canova, as we say in Spanish, is a hollowed out cottonwood tree. And this hollowed out cottonwood tree was then mixed with boiling water. You put all the towels and the blankets there after you had cleaned them in a nearby pond or a ditch. And then this yucca plant over here is to remind me that they would take the amole root. Amole is called the root of the yucca plant, which was a sudsing agent, cleansing agent. They would stamp it with paddles over here, and they would clean them, and this was done once a year. This last piece over here that you are seeing shows my parents, my mom and dad and my brother Ray over here, skinning a hog on top of the table. So what you do is you peel the hog, you boil it, you drop it into boiling water. This opens the pores of the animal, and then when you do, then you are able to scrape away all of the hair, the short hair from the pig, in this particular case a black and white pig, and then you can use that skinned animal to make chicharrones, or chitlins as they call them in English culture. And of course the idea that they are standing in the snow reflects the idea that they come from northern New Mexico somewhere. When we look at this next series of paintings, you will notice that one of the biggest ones that I have is the sheep herder. I have a great admiration for the sheep herders. My father had 14 sheep herders, I believe, when I was growing up. And they used to sit around late at night, and they would make the shepherd's bread late at night and tell me the ancient stories, which became the first in a series of articles that I happen to have published. Since then, I have published close to 3,000 articles on New Mexico Hispanic folk culture, but this particular one shows the pastor de borregas, as the sheep herder is known, right next to his tent, and his faithful dog over there just watching him, and I'm sitting somewhere outside of the picture recording everything for future use. This next painting over here shows an ancient ritual by which we greet the new year with song and dance. This is called Dando los Días, or Los Manueles. People will serenade each other with violins and guitars and wake up anyone named Manuel or Manuela in the middle of the night. And doing this will bring you good luck and many blessings for the following year. When we look at this next work, this is called La Monita Ciega. Sometimes it's called Blind Man's Buff. But this is a a time, a very happy time, when I remember that after sunset, the old woman would sit here next to the house, and the rest of us children would go out into the patio, blindfold one of them, spin them around, and then tap them to see if they could tell us who it was that had tapped them. This is an old game that comes back from Mother Spain, but it had never been recorded here in New Mexico, so that's what I did in this particular painting. This last piece in this series is called A New Mexico Funeral. We have to remember that as much as we like celebrating life, sometimes we are all touched by La Sebastiana herself, by Old Lady Death. And so this shows a ritual by which 6 strapping young men are carrying the coffin. In this particular case, my brother's coffin. And the village that you see way in the background, that's the village of Arroyo Seco, my own village, and the people all join into it. So it is not just a one family deal. Funerals in northern New Mexico tend to be whole community deals. Culture in northern New Mexico is not just limited to eating, drinking, and celebrating. It's also limited to religious rituals. In this particular case, you see a painting called The Excommunication of Padre Martinez. Padre Martinez of Taos is an actual historical character who was honored for the first time this year because they put a statue of him in the middle of Taos Plaza. But here he is being excommunicated by the first Archbishop of Santa Fe. The first Archbishop of Santa Fe, called Jean-Baptiste Lamy, thought that the people who belonged to the tribal church really knew nothing about the institutional church, and so he had him driven away. Now I think we are lifting the excommunication from him and saying, it's okay, we were part of the same people. When we look at this particular one, this is also a painful memory from my past. This is called Arroyo Seco Funeral. In those days, we didn't have funeral homes in Taos County, not until 1959. So the first funeral I remember was from my own cousin, Christopher Marquez, who was laid out on top of the table while the Hermanos Penitentes used to sing here, and they would pray for them. In the meantime, if you look carefully at the background, way back in the kitchen area, you see a woman taking a pie out of the oven. These are quiet memories of my own childhood, death at an early age. This next piece is called La Entrada de los Matachines a la Arena. So you have the Matachin dancers. Matachin dancers are Moorish folk dancers, and we thought that they were native dancers for the longest while, but now, after all these centuries, we realize this was a dance that was originally Moorish, brought to Mexico in 1533, and now there are 42 different versions, all the way from the Copper Canyon, all the way through Pueblo in southern Colorado. This next image shows 3 little boys on Christmas morning. This is called Mis Christmas. The little boys would go out early on Christmas morning and wish people happy tidings, Christmas tidings. It's a ritual that you don't see much around anymore in northern New Mexico, but you see the lady, in this case my tia Alicia, hiding behind the curtain waiting. So it was kind of like a Spanish version of trick or treat, except that we didn't wear masks and we did it on Christmas morning rather than on Halloween. When we speak of northern New Mexico culture among the Hispanos, we have to consider that a lot of our traditions are based on medieval beliefs that we still keep alive in many ways. This particular piece illustrates the idea that in Hispano culture, the way you die is a reflection of the way you lived. So death is not death, is not death, is not death automatically. In this case, you see my coffin, and printed upon my coffin it says, Era y soy polvo, I was and I am dust. Sitting on top of my coffin is Old Lady Death herself, La Sebastiana. She's the one who comes for everyone, regardless of whether they are good or evil. She just comes for everyone. Then you have the ones who come for felons, the ones who come for abusers, the Lady Death who comes for old people, the one who comes to scare away children, the one who comes for the sick, and the one who comes for those who have led a good life and just simply helps them fall asleep. So what I'm trying to illustrate over here is that death is not death, is not death, but depending on how you lived will also depend on how you die. And according to the old traditions that we have in New Mexico, there are 4 different worlds where you can go after you're dead. Purgatorio over here is a place of cleansing. It is not heaven, it is not hell, it is somewhere in between. Whereas up here you have limbo. Limbo is reserved for unbaptized children. They do not suffer, they just spend an eternity asking for water. You can go down here to infierno. Infierno is the English equivalent of hell, or the Spanish equivalent of the English hell. This is a place of great torment and suffering. And we come to the last realm, which is paradiso, or there, paraíso, which is heaven. If you've been a good person, that's likely where you'll end up. The dark side of culture is just as important as the bright side of culture. This illustrates an ancient story called La Bruja de los Zapatos Nuevos. Here you see some witches doing their Sabbath rites off a little place. You see the owl perched precariously over here by the chimney, and you see some new shoes over here. This is an ancient story that is told in northern New Mexico of how some witches drew a girl out of the chimney and took away her shoes and had her strangled up there. It's a little bit gruesome, but it does define what is part of culture as well. In this piece, you see two characters in the foreground. The first one is the devil figure. If the face looks familiar, it is because it is my face. I played Lucifer on stage for many, many years. And this is from a morality play called Los Pastores, which are recognized in southern New Mexico as Los Pastores de Mesilla. But here is the temptation scene. The devil is tempting a hermit while the shepherds are all asleep, and you see the old Arroyo Seco church in the background. So I make it as real as possible. The sheep are also here in the background. In this particular piece, you see something which has always bothered me, my own personal nightmares. These are the stories that haunted my youth from the time that I was little. So you see me asleep here in my bed, but except for being all grown up now, you'd think that I would have gotten rid of all of these nightmares. But these are things. I think we spend our entire adulthoods recovering from our childhoods. Here you see the chufunete, or the cochare from the pueblo, who's coming. He's somebody who scared me from the time that I was little. Or La Larga, who chops children up into stew meat if you're out after sunset. This is the abuelo figure. This is the Christmas ogre that comes for you instead of Santa Claus. Here you see the Llorona, the weeping woman. Cute Largo, old man coats, that reflects foreign Greek culture in northern New Mexico. La Negra comes from the village of Arroyo Hondo. Here you see the Coco man wrapped in a blanket coming to you from the dark. You see the one-eyed cyclopean creature called La Tuerta, and slithering out from under the bed over here you see El Vivoron. Next to are the little creek that flowed by my parents' house was Botas, the lady with the big boots who would stomp you into the ground if you disobeyed your parents. Malogra, this cotton-looking wad over here, is called Malogra. Malogra is the evil deed doer. She comes from the village of Cañon. Jorupa comes from the villages of Peñasco and Chamizal. And over there you have La Desconocida, the unknown one, who dwells in the clouds and comes down to you when you are least expecting it. The Taos Fiestas were a source of great joy and also great fright for me when I was young. It is reflected in this particular painting. This is me, the child pointing into the high creatures up there. There was great joy because you had people like Ginger, who used to dance in the middle of the stage with Raphael, and she didn't care what the people thought. She was there to have a good time. But for the younger people, there were also some monsters that slithered across Taos Plaza. There was the Fiesta dragon called Vivoron, which is a reflection of the old Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. There was a Fiesta ogre. So ogres, abuelos as we call them in northern New Mexico, sleep all year long in the mountains. But if you wake them up, especially in summer, they're going to come very grouchy and take you away. Then you had the Fiesta witch, La Bruja, over here. She is a reflection of all the old things that go bump in the night, as we recall when we were little. This particular painting is called Pasando la Tradición, or Transferring Culture. Here you see the older generation male, and he is showing the younger boy how to fiddle. He himself has a violin under his own arm, but the little boy has a stringed instrument over here, a folk fiddle. And in the meantime, you see the old grandpa over here by the chickens taking a siesta snooze, and grandma over here washing on the old washboards and hanging her linen out to dry at the same time. One of the first things that I ever painted was the legend of La Llorona, or the woman who drowned her own children and then had to spend the rest of eternity looking for them. So in this particular case, you see a woman draped in black seeking for her drowned children. This is usually based on the old legend that says that when Hernan Cortes came to Mexico City. He fell in love with the lady Malinche, and he sired some children with her. Then later on, he left back to Spain without taking his children with him. The mother was so angry because her children were neither pure Spanish nor pure Indian. They were the first mestizo children, so she drowned them. Then the legend says she goes up to heaven where St. Peter at the gate says, ¿Dónde están tus hijos? Where are your children? She says, Los he dejado al filo del agua. I left them at the edge of the water. And then he says, Maldita seas, cursed be thou. Now you must return to earth and haunt the waterways until you can find them all. So whenever children are getting too close to dangerous waterways like acequias or river runoff, people say, cuidado con la llorona, and they know better than to go by running water. It's amazing how many of the birthing rituals of New Mexico were learned from the native peoples, right? When you think about today, women who are going to have a baby are usually put with their feet in stirrups, but there was a much more logical way of having a baby way back in those days. They would hang a rope from the viga, the pregnant woman would pull down under, and the natural gravity would pull the baby out of her, and it would drop into a little fleece blanket. She would be helped in this ritual by a man called el tenedor, or the holder, and the curandera, the midwife, would be on this other side. La partera would be on this side, swathing her face. In the meantime, her husband, who was not allowed in the room at that time, would be in the next room praying or dancing to Saint Raymond over here, who is the patron of expectant mothers. Sometimes I like to paint also things that do not deal with a particular story or a particular anecdote. In this large painting that you see over here, we have a scene based on one of my nightmares. In my nightmare, my house is floating down from the clouds. Notice it is not anchored to the fields that are furrowed behind it. And as it is flowing down from the top of the sky, it sprouts roots, and the roots reach down into the ground where I am already dead and lying within the womb of Mother Earth. And then I have one eye on earth, another one in the sky. The mountains in the background are the mountains of Arroyo Seco, the Sangre de Cristo mountains. That's why I painted the sky, that scarlet color that you see in front of you. This is a very surrealist piece, but it's certainly one of my favorite ones because it means something to me. I'm not sure what it is, but I know it is deep there somewhere. Tradition is very important to the Hispano cultures. Here you see a typical wedding scene. The groom and the bride are kneeling, receiving their grandparents' blessing, while their own parents are watching in the foreground. You have the musicians, los músicos over here. You have the violinist and the guitarist, which are part of most any Latino celebration. In the background, in the second room, you have the servicial, the head waiter. And it is the waiter's job, the servicial's job, to make sure that la mesa del banquete, or the wedding feast table, is properly stocked at all times. So he stands at attention full time. As we approach this last piece, I wanted you to see that not only am I concerned with Hispano culture, but with all culture that makes up the Hispanic Southwest, particularly New Mexico. This particular piece is called The Murder of Governor Bent. Charles Bent was the first American-appointed governor of New Mexico, and what he did on that particular morning in the mid-1800s was he was writing a proclamation of statehood, when suddenly he heard a knock on the door. People came to the door, scalped him. It's one of the unsolved mysteries of New Mexico. Was it the natives? Was it the French people? Was it the parish priest? All kinds of speculation has arisen all of these years. But this is an actual scene where you see his own family in a panic. His own wife and his sister-in-law took an old spoon and a poker, and they dug a hole through the adobe wall to effect this escape into the next room. It's one of the most brutal scenes from New Mexico history, but it's one that needs to be recalled, and in this particular case, in full color.
The preceding was a production of New Mexico State University. The views and opinions in this program are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the NMSU Board of Regents.